Hello everybody, the next plane off the pile is a Stanley Gage number 7 joiner plane. Let's take a look at it. This old beauty is a Type 2 made between 1924 and 1930. It was called a self-setting plane because the need for a lateral adjustment lever was eliminated. In addition, the claim to fame was the lever cap and iron could be removed and replaced without any need for making adjustments after you did it. Initial assessment is there's a significant loss of japanning. I've got a chunk of the top edge of the tote missing, but overall it's looking like it's got some good bones. The smooth bottom looks in really good shape, and the book value of this old plane is $125 to $350. Stanley bought out Gage and made the metal bench planes from 1919 to 1941. There were 4 types. The Type 1 had patent applied. That was 1919 to 1923. The Type 2 is this one right here that has the patent date of 2/17/20. The Type 3 came about from 1930 to 1941, and the noticeable difference on that was they put a G in front of the 7, so then they became a number G7 instead of just the number 7. Nobody's exactly sure when the Type 4 started. The difference was they added Made in USA to the casting, and so that was somewhere during the Type 3 era of 1930 to 1941. Let's break it down. And there she is, all the parts laid out, ready to clean up and restore. Right off the bat, you see there's a few parts here that look kind of foreign to you. If you've never messed with a Gage plane before, that is. So we're going to kind of go through them here real quick. First thing you see is your depth adjustment knob, just like on a block plane. And over here is your lever cap and your set screw for the lever cap. This is the chip breaker. This little piece over here, it's called the clamping plate. This piece is called the guide block. That's your guide block screw, and this screw here is the frog screw. Just one. We'll take a look at the frog here in just a second. And I forgot to mention the 2 screws and washers that are for the chip breaker. So the chip breaker screws and washers. Now the frog. That's a whole completely different animal. Look at that. So it's a one-piece frog. It's held in place at the bottom, and there's a pin on each side that goes through, which is barely visible there, but you can see it. So it's pinned on the left and the right, not removable, and one screw at the bottom to hold it in place. If you didn't catch the name of all those parts, I'll do it real quick like this right here. You'll be able to freeze the video and go back and look at what they are if you're interested. That's enough talk. It's time for action. Time to clean up the Japan parts. That's the base and the lever cap. For that job, I'm going to use some simple green and a toothbrush. The scrubbing is done. I didn't learn anything new. No surprises. And of course, like just about every one of the over 1,000 of these that I've done, there's the white paint. This is the time when you want to make a mental note or even write it down of where the japanning is and where it is not. If you want to do an authentic looking restoration, one of the worst things you can do is put japanning where it's not supposed to be. Now that I know where the japanning belongs and does not belong, I'm going to take a couple different scraping tools and scrape off the loose japanning before I put the stripper on. And with all the loose japanning removed, I'm going to go ahead and apply the stripper. I'm covering every surface and going to let the stripper sit for about 15 minutes. And while the stripper works, it's time to fix the problem with the tote. The first thing I have to do is clean up this jagged break. And now I have a nice flat surface to attach the new piece of rosewood to. For me, there are 2 options for how I'm going to repair this tote. I've got a piece of rosewood that I've matched as much as I could, the grain and the angle and the color, that I'm going to glue back on. The other option is to, if you've got a broken tote that has a good horn on it, you can just cut that piece of the horn off and glue it on. For the glue, I'm going to use Gorilla Glue, and for clamping, I'm going to use electrical tape. First, I'm going to dampen the surface to be bonded with water and apply the glue. And while it may not be pretty, it works. I'm going to use electrical tape to clamp it in place. After I glue these up, I usually leave them sit for about 24 hours, but it can be less. While that was going on, I finished up the bottom and the lever cap. I rinsed them off, and then I used a dental pick and a scraper wherever I saw japanning that remained. I kind of cleaned up as much as I could, because the next step is to prep it for paint by putting it in my sandblaster. And here's a look after the sandblasting. It's looking pretty good. Next thing I'm going to do is take my scraper to the sides and the sole of the bottom. There's the scraper right there. I did a video by itself on how to make and use these scrapers. Quite an effective tool if you want to retain your patina, or even just to clean it up prior to lapping or whatever you're going to do. So I went over these edges right here all the way around, front and back, with 150 grit sandpaper. Next thing I'm going to do is use the same old worn piece 150, and I'm going to see what I can do to even up the look of the sides of this plane. It's going to be a little finesse sanding, a little more on the dark spots, a little less on the light spots, and see what I can do to even it out. So I've gone over both sides, and what I've done is more of a blending than a sanding. And if you look at this paper, you can see what I'm talking about. Most of my pressure was applied there, and there's not a lot of paper left. It's just blending it in. The last step I'm going to do, well, not the last, but the next step is the worn out piece of sanding sponge. A little more evening up of the tone. Next is a little bit of 3/0 steel wool. And the last thing I'm doing is some 3000 grit paper. So I'm happy with the look that I've achieved. You can see it here. It still has an aged look to it. It doesn't look new and restored. So I'm going to stop right there. I did the same thing to the sole, these down to the 150 grit. And what I'm thinking I'm going to do on this one is lap it. The scratches are purely cosmetic. I did not check the bottom to see if it was perfectly flat with my straight edge, because I decided I'm going to lap those shallow scratches out. I'll know how flat it is as soon as I start to do the lapping. I put 4 fresh sheets, 150 grit on here, and now it's just a matter of time and elbow grease. And just after a few passes, I'm going to be able to see how true it was. And high spot here, high spot there, so the bottom didn't have to use a straight edge. It's telling me right here the bottom was not perfectly flat. So I spent about 30 minutes on the lapping, and it's time to quit. Overall, she's coming out looking really good. There's end to end look at it. The only place that remains any of those shallow scratches is right there, slightly forward of the throat. You should be able to see it. There's no sense lapping that much more metal off. This plane is ready to go to work or put on a shelf. And now everything is taped off, holes are plugged, and ready for the first coat of finish. I'm going to build up multiple coats of paint. One coat down and several to go. So far it looks really good. I've taken the tape off the tote, and now I'm going to use my bandsaw to shape the wood up kind of rough shape like it should be. So now the new piece is shaped up pretty good as far as being rough shaped. What I'm going to do now to get it down to where it's real close to being finished is use my scraper. These scrapers are great little tools. They let me control the removal of the rosewood and shape it up really nice. After the scraping's done, I'm going to sand the entire tote with 150 grit paper. And with the 150 done, I'm moving on to a medium grit sanding sponge. Remember to sand with the grain. I'm going to finish it up with some 3/0 steel wool. So the tote is done, now it's on to the knob. But first, I've got 4 coats of the finish on my bottom and lever cap, and it's time to put the final coat on. One even coat over the entire thing. Now that the knob is sanded, I can see I got some pretty significant dings in it. I like to fill those with some rosewood paste. Get some dust, mix it with wood glue, and with a putty knife, patch in all those holes. And with the paste applied, you just got to let it dry for a couple hours. And there are no shortage of things left to do. I want to get this tape off of here before the paint gets too hard. So now the bottom and the lever cap look really good. It's time to break out the dirty oil rag. The dirty oil gets applied to every crack and crevice. I'm not going to wipe that oil off until the very last thing when I get ready to do the waxing. The next thing to do is to sand the rosewood paste that's dried overnight. I'm using 150 grit paper on my sanding block. And the end result looks way better than what it did. The next step, I'm going to take some Brazilian rosewood Minwax gel stain and use my Q-tip to apply it and cover these. I like using the Q-tip because I'm lazy. I don't have anything to clean up afterwards. And after the stain is applied, it's time to give them a coat of lacquer. Applying multiple thin coats is the best way to go. And next up is the iron and the chip breaker. The back side of the chip breaker looks like it was originally blued, so nothing aggressive here. Going to clean it up with some steel wool and try to retain the bluing. Look at that curve and think, uh-oh, this is... The iron and the chip breaker cleaned up nice. The only thing left for me to do to those is to sharpen the iron. And there's a look at the finished iron. Here's the back side, and here's a look at the beveled edge. And it's on to the small parts. And with the small parts clean and lubricated, the hard work is over. The only thing I've got left to do is wipe off the dirty oil, the oil on the small parts, and give everything a coat of wax. And there's all the parts looking really good. Wax is on, wax is off. The bottom, new finish. The repaired tote with new finish. Lever cap has received new finish. Razor sharp iron. All the small parts. It's time to put this old beauty back together. And isn't she a pretty plane? Look at that. The old number 7 auto set. Take a look at it front to back. Here's a look at the other side. And here's a look at the bottom. Looking good. I've done quite a few of these Gage planes, and I'll tell you one thing. Well, it may be called auto set. It takes you a long time to get that iron lined up and secure in there when you're putting it back together. And I haven't even done a test drive yet, so if it has to be adjusted, we'll see what that's going to do. I'm using 1 5/8 inch poplar for the test drive. Seems to be working really good. Looks like another spectacular performance for a Stanley plane. I give this one a pass. The old Gage 7 performed very well. It's going to make a good shelf sitter, a good user, depending on what the next owner wants to do with it. Its unique design eliminates the need for lateral adjustment, and it does work. You just have to learn how to use it. I'm going to make that a topic in another video because there's not enough time in this one. And that's it for this video. The old G7 performs just as good as she looks. So if you ever have the opportunity to get a Gage plane, don't back off on it. They're pretty good. But for today, that's it. Next plane off the pile, who knows what it's going to be. And if you haven't signed up for my free plane giveaway, Stanley number 5 in December, look for the video on the Stanley number 5. That's it for today. Time for supper. Bye.